Welcome, friends and fellow passionate entrepreneurial teachers. I am joined again today by Ken Caputo, my partner in Momentum Learning Systems and our TIE Academy program for integrated entrepreneurs. And we are back today. Like I mentioned, Ken's going to be joining me more frequently during this year. And we had talked about last time while we were sharing the 5 practices, move, think, connect, fuel, empower. We had mentioned the idea of the life spiral and sharing that. So that is our topic for today is the life spiral. And it stems from something that our teacher taught us many times over the years, and we're gonna dive in. I will say that if you listened to the previous episode with the 5 practices, you're going to notice some overlap between the two concepts. And the best way to think of it is what we're talking about today, the life spiral, is kind of the larger vision that you can take as you're assessing your life, trying to spiral up, trying to move towards fulfillment, happiness, joy, purpose, meaning, whatever you're looking to gain from your life. And then the 5 practices are the daily habits that you practice to get there, to help spiral up. So again, there will be some overlap, but one is more vision, the other one is a little bit more integration. So with that, I am going to be sharing my screen. So if you're listening and you would like to see what we're talking about, you can go to our YouTube channel, which is at Momentum Learning Systems. And you'll be able to see everything. If not, I think you will still be able to visualize. There's nothing that's going to be on the screen that you won't be able to understand audibly. But I'm going to get that set up. And Ken, can you tell us a little bit about John Fritz, which is the picture that is up right now? So this is our teacher, and Ken, sorry, Ken, you had a very long, deep relationship with him. So can you, as best you can, for the amazing, ridiculous person that John was, can you explain who John Fritz is a little bit?
Yes, that's as best I can, I think is the operant term there. So the history, it started back when we became dear friends over time, but he started as my martial arts teacher back in probably the early to mid 90s. And he was an incredibly knowledgeable martial artist who followed a very, very winding path. So a lot of people, when they think of martial artists, they think of fighting or self-defense and that kind of thing. John actually moved more into seeing it as a way to help people live their best lives. And he became very, very immersed in the healing aspects of it, especially. So he studied a lot of Eastern philosophy, especially Taoism, went to South America, started studying different philosophical practices down there. He studied North American, Native American practices. And what he was doing was he was looking for the common truths for that all of these things were dancing with to figure out how to just be a good person and live a life of value. So he was a brilliant man who had his own unique perspective and way of seeing the world. And I think the thing that we all loved about him most was his genuine joy in seeing all of us expand as humans and contribute. Like he loved the way we all were able to bring our own unique selves and our own unique contributions to the world around us. And that really inspired a lot of what we've done, everything from the Thai Academy to Quester's Way. All of her work has been found, around that same foundation that and vision that John and I and Steph shared together. So I think that's about the best I can do.
Yeah, and John would talk a lot about crazy wisdom, and he did experience a TBI, a traumatic brain injury from training in the martial arts. We won't go too deep in that story, but he actually had to recover to the point of learning how to speak again. So that was where his journey into this healing side of the martial arts and qigong and tai chi really started, was having to go through his own healing journey, and I think that created a pivot point in his story that changed the path to move it in a different direction than it would have had that not happened. And I think the most impactful thing about John was his genuine curiosity, fascination, and excitement for others, for other people reaching their full potential. He had this way of looking at you and looking through to the core of who you were and everything that you could possibly become to your light. Almost too far, almost a little out of balance in his putting others first. And we unfortunately lost him 2 years ago, November of 2021, to cancer, which he told no one about because he didn't want the attention to be on him thematically throughout his entire life, at least the time that we got to know him in the last 25 years or so. He was always putting others first. And even through this process of transition, he wanted the spotlight to stay on others. So he was a pretty exceptional human in a very esoteric way. So it was always fun to spend time with John, to have conversations with John. Sometimes you left kind of confused, but you always left feeling good, feeling lighter. So now we're going to dive into the three circles. So John would ask the question, I heard him ask it on numerous occasions: how could you experience heaven on earth? What would the feeling of heaven on earth be like? And he would pause for a moment and give this little mischievous smile and say, 3 8s. And then as you were sitting there in mild confusion, just sort of grinning because you didn't know what was going on, he would then follow up and ask the question, how would you experience hell on earth? What would hell on earth feel like? And then again, equally mysterious, his answer was 3 2s. And then he would do his little John laugh and say, it's simple. And I have an image that I'm going to share for those of you that are watching on YouTube. It is a lot of scribbles and circles and lines. And this was an image. This was a drawing that John did one of the times that he was explaining this. We were having a one-on-one conversation, and he was explaining this whole idea to me. And what I love about this picture, why I will cherish this piece of paper forever, is it is the perfect representation of the crazy wisdom that John was always talking about. But there is actually some sense in here, so we're gonna tease that out now. So these are the three circles that we've been prefacing. So Ken, would you like to explain each of them, just kind of and briefly, what they are? So the first one is vitality, and then I'll let you take over, Ken.
Yes. So, he liked vitality as opposed to just thinking about health or physical fitness or something like that. He was thinking more in terms holistically of the vital energy that allows you to live the life of your choosing, so that you're not limited by things like struggling immune system or poor sleep. It can be anything, but it's also the vitality that you express outward. So it's when you watched John, there was this, just even as he aged, it didn't matter. In his 70s, you could just feel this sense of energy and youthfulness and curiosity that just kind of oozed out of him all over us. So you felt better being around him. And when we cultivate our own vitality, that's what happens. It's just, we've all had people in our lives like that. You just feel good. They don't have to do anything for you to feel good when you're in their presence. It's their energetic flow of just, living their life in a way where they're able to cultivate that level of vitality that adds value to their lives and the lives of those around them.
Our next circle is relationships. So Ken, would you like to give us the brief overview of the relationship circle?
Yes. So when you're thinking in terms of relationships, there we'll explore two perspectives of this circle. But the main thing to think about is one of the biggest epidemics we're facing right now, they keep talking about, is loneliness. It's this feeling of isolation and disconnect. So a lot of who we are and how we feel about the world around us and within us is basically it's directly connected to the relationships that we have with people that we care about and also with ourselves. So cultivating this circle is a huge part of kind of amplifying the impact of your vitality. So, and we'll talk more about intersection. I don't want to get too deep into it, but if you think about having all this vital energy and no one to share it with, what's the point? Right? So that's where the relationship circle comes in.
Yes, and if you're not watching on YouTube, as we're introducing these, there are circles coming in that are overlapping like a Venn diagram. So you can kind of put that image in your head of three overlapping circles. And then the final one is value.
So value is your ability to contribute to something that's greater than yourself. And in the martial arts, we would talk a lot about this principle of the unbendable arm. And it's the idea of looking beyond, like, for example, if you're going to break a board, you don't focus on the surface of the board, you focus past it. So the idea is your perspective is greater than yourself. So the value is your unique contribution to the world that's going to be to the betterment of things that are larger than you.
Perfect. And then what John would say is how much these circles overlap in the center is your sense of satisfaction, purpose, life fulfillment, whatever word you want to give it. It's that feeling that your existence has value, that your contribution, you're connected to the world around you, and how good you feel really is at the center with the life that you're living. And the idea is to the way that you can kind of grade yourself, because John had this interesting balance between kind of Eastern and Western and left brain, right brain, and kind of more the engineering logical mind, balanced with this more spiritual, ethereal kind of space that he could also exist in. So he would invite you to give each of these circles a score on a scale of 1 to 10. So you value each one. How high of a score you have determines how far into the middle each of these circles overlap. So this next part is a little bit more visual, but you can imagine it in your head. So heaven on earth, those 3 8s, right? That means as you're looking at your life, you're giving yourself an 8 in vitality, how much energy you feel that you have. You're giving yourself an 8 in relationships, things are going really well. And an 8 in value and your feeling of contribution, like your work has meaning beyond, just yourself, so that you're making a difference in the world around you. So that means those circles are all moving into a higher degree. There's a larger overlap in the Venn diagram. So that center represents the heaven on earth feeling that John is inviting us to consider. And then hell on earth was 3 2s. So similarly, there's going to be much less overlap between your 3 circles. And that experience at the center is just that feeling of disconnect, of loneliness, of just sluggishness, worthlessness that some of us fight through at different times. So it's all about how close they are, how far away they are from the center. So if you start to play with the math, right, back to hell on earth, 2 times 2 times 2 gives you a life score, let's say a life fulfillment score of 8. Not awesome. And if you look at heaven on earth, which would be those 3 8s again, you've got 8 times 8 times 8, which now gives you a life fulfillment score of 512. So exponentially greater feelings of fulfillment the closer that those circles get to the center. They have an exponential impact on each other, where the whole is way greater than the sum of its parts. So if you were to take kind of an average person, let's say, maybe their health, their vitality, their energy is at like a 5. They would score themselves average for their fitness level. Maybe they get the 3 p.m. sleepies, but it's not too bad. Their ability to stay awake throughout the day, the mental energy they have, their vitality is average. And then relationships, are doing okay. They score themselves as a 7. They've got a healthy family. They've got a strong friend group. There's not a lot of feelings of loneliness. So the relationships are feeling pretty strong. But then maybe their value circle is at like a 3. So they don't really feel like they have a whole lot of voice at work. They don't feel that there's really a strong sense of contribution that they're providing to the world around them. So if you do the math, 3 times 5 times 7 would give them a life fulfillment score of 105. So this is where if you're an analytical logical type, this is like, ooh, super interesting. If you're not a math person, this is probably blowing your brain right now, but it's the concept that's important. You don't need to really grasp the numbers. So we've got this average person that's at 105. So now let's say that they start to make a couple of changes. Maybe they start coaching their kids' little league team, or they get involved in their daughter's, Girl Scout troop or Cub Scout troop, and they bring that value score up to a 5, where now they feel like they have a voice, like they're making a positive impact on the world around them. It's not amazing, it's still just average, but they've brought that circle up a little bit. And then with that invigorating feeling of contribution, they decide to start, just making a couple of little tweaks to bring up their vitality. So by coaching the little league, they're running around a little more. They decide to start going for walks at lunch and eating a salad instead of something like a burger or a greasy sub or something like that. So they bump their vitality score just 1 point, just from a 5 to a 6. So now when you do the math, just with those little changes, you've got 5 times 6 times 7, which now gives them a score of 210. So just by making a couple of little tweaks and changes to increase their feeling of satisfaction in these 3 circles, they've doubled their score, their life score. And again, these numbers are just kind of arbitrary and representative. They're just to give you a picture you can play with. And if you're a more, again, analytically number-driven person, these kind of games can be sort of fun to play with. It can create an anchor that's a little easier to understand than just how do I boost my vitality. These are really fuzzy kind of circles. They're broad topics that can be influenced by a lot of things, which is why those 5 practices are really helpful, because those are like the anchors. Those are the action items. They're the verbs that you can do. So vitality, relationships, value, those are nouns, and they're conceptual nouns. They're hard to touch and grasp. But move, think, connect, fuel, empower, those are actions that you can take. Those are things that you can do. So that's how these interrelate. And those 5 practices, can plug themselves in and have influence on all of these circles. So the idea that as we've continued to bring John's work out into the world, John would talk a lot about the 3 circles. The idea of the life spiral is a little bit more of Ken kind of taking this idea and figuring out how to share it with others. So what we've noticed is that a little bit goes a long way, and each circle tends to positively impact the others, just like the numbers we were just looking at. And so as you elevate each circle just a little bit, they all start to help you spiral up. Each one, the better you feel in your relationships, the more energy you're going to have to take care of yourself, the more motivation you're going to have to take care of yourself. And then that's going to then give you the vitality and the feeling of connection that's going to let you share and contribute. And likewise, if you're sharing and contributing and feeling like you're having a positive impact, that's going to help you develop your relationships. That's going to give you that desire and motivation to take better care of yourself so you can show up better for the people that you serve. So they all influence each other, and you can start taking these little baby steps up the life spiral. And when you think about the opposite, what do we say when things aren't going well? I'm in a downward spiral. I'm in a doom loop, So, or you're just spinning in place. You're stuck. You're not getting anywhere. So Ken, do you have anything to add to the idea, to this introduction of the life spiral idea?
I think the most important thing is what you said. It's little things make big differences, and being a little gentle with ourselves. We're not running up a ladder, we're gently walking up a ramp, that's spiraling up a little bit at a time.
Yeah, and then as we think about this, we're gonna go a little bit deeper into each of the three circles for today, and then we're actually probably gonna come back in another episode and go even deeper and give you some more practical ways that you can start to think about each of these three circles and how you can start to make those small changes, do some swaps, or link some new habits that are going to help you start spiraling up. But there's two ideas that are really important. And I was just reading a book recently, and the author brought up the idea of self reflection versus self rumination. And it came from an Ohio State University study. And self rumination is when you sit there and think about all the things you did wrong and how you're not good looking enough and how you've made too many mistakes and all of the things that aren't going well in your life. So that's where you end up in this downward spiral. You're just ruminating on everything that's wrong about you. Where self-reflection and is definitely something that John, I can feel John's influence as I'm starting to talk about it. It's a curiosity. John approached everything with curiosity. His car would break down on his way to a clinic. I remember we were doing a weekend clinic with him one year, and his Porsche that he'd had for like 25 years, because he just didn't, he got the Porsche because he was told that successful people have nice cars, and he didn't really care. So he just kept driving the same Porsche for decades. But the car wouldn't start or something. I forget exactly what happened, but something was wrong with the car. And instead of getting mad, like most of us would do, instead of getting frustrated, he had his very John reaction and just said, I wonder what the universe is trying to teach me today. And he did end up being a little bit late for that day of the weekend seminar, but he turned it into this very valuable lesson that just changes the perspective of how you approach situations, how you approach information. So as we go through this, Ken, I kind of took over. You were going to talk about this piece, but then I just kind of rolled with it. So
That's
as we
quite all
go through
right.
this process, this is a self-reflective process. So if you're experiencing hell on earth right now, if you're at 3 twos, that's good information to know, because if you recognize where you are, if there's awareness, and then if you can find the curiosity about how can I move out of this? I wonder what it would feel like to be higher than 3 twos. Yeah, I wonder what it would feel like to spiral up my life. Now you can start to make progress forward. If you just ruminate on everything that you did wrong and how much you suck, then that's not going to help you get anywhere. That's going to keep you in that downward spiral. So the perspective that you take with this is very important. It's just an opportunity to expand your perspective, to take on a different lens, and it's going to give you a tool that you can use to continue to move forward. So give yourself a little bit of grace. This is the purpose of a test, is, or a quiz or anything like that, is really, it should be to get an idea of where you are and what you need to work on. Unfortunately, we've been taught a lot of times by the public school system that a test either means you're good or you're bad. You pass or you're a failure. And that's not the most valuable way to view exercises like this. This is to get an idea of where you are, so you can start to move in the direction you want to go. You can't get to Disney World if you don't know where on the map you're starting. So Ken, do you want to add to that?
Just one thing, and it has to do with the picture. So there's an image right now on the slide of what's called a Zen circle. And if you're listening, you can actually just do a quick search and there'll be all kinds of images come up. But basically what it is it's you take a paintbrush and you try with one stroke to make a perfect circle. And when you're looking at it, you'll see where it's kind of solid and a little bit circular on one side where the brush was put down. And then on the other side, it's a little open and jagged where the stroke finished. Now, what I was taught by John was to understand and remember that our perspective is always incomplete. There are always things that we don't see. We all have ignorance by nature of just being human and not being omniscient. So part of this practice is about recognizing that and learning to keep asking bigger and better questions until the questions disappear and the answer is revealed. Then get right back to asking questions. So if you're looking at a Zen circle, often we look at it two-dimensionally. But if you look at it three-dimensionally, like you look at it as if you were above it looking down, you can actually see how it looks like from the jagged end where the brushstroke ended, something rising up, and it's actually lifting up towards you. So a Zen circle actually is a spiral if you change your perspective. So the image did not change. All that changed is your understanding of the different dimensions that that image contains by moving your own view from two-dimensional to three-dimensional. And that's the whole point behind the whole life spiral thing, is asking those questions, expanding your perspective.
So I have like a silly little tangential anecdotal story just about this circle, Zen circle idea. There was one time we were in Quester's Way and we were doing some sort of dumb team meeting. I don't even remember what it was for, but we had those giant post-it notes that you can get to stick on the wall. And whatever it was that we were doing, I needed to draw a circle. So I drew a big, like 1 foot diameter circle, and it just came out perfect. And I remember instantly thinking of the Zen circle, because it really was like this magical moment where it was no mind. I wasn't really thinking about it. I drew the circle and then stepped back and was like, whoa. And everybody in the room was also like, whoa. And then that kind of leads to another lesson that I learned vicariously through you. It was something that, Ken, you shared about your lessons, your martial arts lessons with John. Whenever you would do something well, he would ask you, what is that? And then the Zen answer always was,
Nothing special.
nothing special. Yeah. And it was just this interesting moment where these two, just that sensation of creating this perfect circle. And then the fact that it was something that really, the beauty was in letting go. What was I going to do? Hold on, like give myself a gold star for drawing a circle? Like that's kindergarten stuff, but it really was like a perfect circle. So I thought it was just a random story, just as you were sharing the Zen circle thing. But there was one more kind of introductory concept that's good to understand as we get deeper into these three circles. And I think actually this is going to be a little bit more of a teaser for the next time that we take this a level deeper. I don't think we're going to talk about plus minus equals much today, but I think it'd be good to introduce the idea and then we can revisit it again next time. And this is part of the perspective that we take as we start to assess these three circles. So Ken, would you like to explain the plus minus equals idea? Or sorry,
Yes,
plus minus neutral. I'm sorry, I was
yeah.
mixing it up with something else. So the idea is plus minus neutral for this.
Yes, yes. And we use this a lot, especially when we're working with, if we're doing coaching, working with entrepreneurs. The idea is to look at the the practices in your life, the things that you do, the situations you're in. And we call it an attention audit. And the idea is to just look at them and think, do these things add to the three circles in some way? Do they have very little impact on the three circles in some way? Or do they reduce the availability of my life fulfillment score in some way? Now, we use minus because these are not negatives. So, for example, if you have an infant, you have this amazing new creature that's entered into your life, but sleep is probably going to be a minus for a while. And that's a welcome trade-off to the fact that you have this child that's now come into your life. It may not feel super welcome yet, but the point is it's not a negative, right? And it's just recognizing that we have things that draw away from us. We have a lot of our life are just neutral. They're just things that we're doing, they're habits that we have that don't really impact through the perspective of these three circles. And then we have things that add, they energize one of those circles in some way. So we're just, again, it's perspective. Let's become consciously aware of the rhythms of our lives and the impact that it's having.
Perfect. All right. So now we're going to start to jump into each of the three circles a little bit. And what I would invite you to do, if you're a frequent listener of the podcast, is we're going to give you some questions that you could think about for the circles. Let it kind of roll around in your head a little bit over the next week or so. If you're catching up and you were planning on listening to these back to back, I would actually recommend giving yourself some time between this episode and the next one so that you can just notice these three circles and how they show up and influence your days and your energy and your emotions as you move through your life. And then for the next piece, it's going to take it a level deeper, but I think you'll get more out of it if you can kind of ingest the ideas first and practice noticing. Then you can jump in to, how it's going to actually apply in your life. John, because this is a podcast episode full of John lessons, John would often talk about notice, learn, apply, kind of as the process that you want to move through. So the first thing is just to open the space to start noticing how this new information may connect to your life, to the world around you, if it's interesting or not. Give yourself the space to be open to it. Maybe you've been listening and you're like, this is all woo woo garbage. So maybe just notice that. Don't judge it. Just open your mind to whatever inputs you're getting, and then from there you can start to decide what you want to do with it. All right. So the first of the circles that we usually end up talking about is vitality. So the question is, what does vitality mean to you? Because it's going to be very different for each of us. The level of vitality that Patrick Mahomes needs to do his job is very different than the vitality level that, the average person needs to do their job. So even if you look at another high performer in a different type of industry, Steve Jobs' vitality is different than Jeff Bezos' vitality, even though they're both high performers, however you judge them, even though they're both very high performers in what they do, they have different requirements. So the requirements that I have to be the person that I want to be in the world is different than what Ken needs to do what he's doing, because he wants to go run up mountains and swing on jungle gyms doing Spartan races and stuff. That's different than, for me, probably, I guess, if that's kind of his big focus on the side, for me, it's vitality means having the mental and physical energy to show up for my son so that we can do things together, and there's obviously, there's overlap between those things, between family and health and all that stuff. But it's different is the point. And this can show up physically, it can show up mentally, and it can show up spiritually. So Ken, do you want to take over sharing on vitality a little bit more?
Yeah, and I think that for each of these, so our role is to help you figure out what questions to ask, because you really want to recognize that you already know a lot of the answers, and it's really just revealing them. So, and a lot of times where we get stuck is either someone's trying to give us their answers, but those might not be appropriate to us. So, and that's what Steph's saying, like physically, resistance training is something that's tremendously helpful metabolically, for strength, for longevity. There's all kinds of benefits. And more we're learning about that, especially over the last decade. But what resistance training means to you is going to be relative to what you want to accomplish, right? So I perform as an athlete. So I do a lot more intensity with resistance training than someone who just wants to be able to pick up their kids, carry groceries upstairs, get out of bed without pain, bend over and tie your shoelaces. So it's really thinking about not judging how you are doing physically, mentally, and spiritually. It's more about thinking, what's important to me? And we always want to remember the journey is the home. Our life has weather systems that come and go. There are storms, there are sunny days, and we want to be present for all of it because it's all you get. All you have is the moment right now. Sometimes your vitality feels like everything's in flow and you feel really great. Other times, not so much. So that's okay. We want to find ways to recognize it when you're hurt. There's lessons that you can learn from that to be less hurt or to not get hurt again. So it's really just asking yourself these questions. If you think about the energy that you cultivate so that you can move through the world in a way that fits in with your image of who you want to be as you move through the world, those are the questions you want to frame. And like Steph said, we go deeper into this, but that kind of gives you the framework for how to think about it.
And as you're thinking about your vitality, it's obviously going to be influenced a little bit more by, if you listened to the last episode with Ken on the 5 practices, move and fuel are going to be two of those practices that really most heavily influence vitality, but they will be influenced by the others as well. So think connection and empower, those are all going to have a contribution. So all the practices fit into all of these circles. So the second circle is relationships. So the question you can ask yourself over the next few days or week before you listen to the next episode is, what do relationships mean to you? And this relationship circle is partially about your relationship to others, and friends, enemies, and neutrals, to use the Buddhist way of thinking of it. So it's your relationships you have to other people, but also the relationship that you have to yourself. Your relationship with yourself is the longest and most consistent relationship that you will have throughout the entire course of your life. You will never not be with you. So it's a very valuable relationship to think about and to invest some time in. So Ken, do you want to share on relationships?
Yes, and this is a great one for the plus minus neutral. It's a really good lens to play with this through because the idea is relationships often happen to us, and what we want to do is we want to start being a little bit more intentional and thinking, how can I attend to these relationships like a garden? Where, I'm planting seeds, I'm nurturing certain things, I'm pulling out the weeds because sometimes you need to do that. And often, if you think about different times in your life, maybe in a work environment where you're working with someone who's difficult, there's a sense of paralysis, a lack of control over your ability to manage the influence of that relationship that maybe is represented as a minus in your life. So as best we can, we want to really, really tend to this circle proactively and intentionally and be clear about who we are and how we flourish and what we have to offer to help others flourish. And on the flip side, when you look in the mirror, you got to ask yourself, what do I see? And is that a healthy thing? Is it beneficial? And if not, what do I do about that? How do I make myself feel better about the person that looks back at me each day?
And the stronger relationship that you have with yourself, the more you're going to be able to show up in a way that you can be proud of with others, especially with difficult people. So if you have a strong understanding of yourself, of your values, then when others try to move you, you can stay confident and strong in your ability to set boundaries without it turning into a like a victim sort of place where you're pitching a fit because someone's, like, you're in my space, like like, that's breaking a boundary with me. So those things can very quickly become kind of contentious, where if you understand who you are and you're solid in your values, and you also have a respect and curiosity for this other person, even if they're being difficult, disrespectful, even if they're wrong, even if they're doing things that are cruel or unkind, you can still have the ability to view them as another human being, a wounded human being, and then you can choose to be still be strong, and still hold your space, and protect yourself. We talk about sphere of protection in the martial arts, in terms of like self-defense, but it has the same applications when you're talking about interpersonal relationships as well. So you can hold true to who you are while also respecting the path that the other person is on.
Yeah, and I think that is a big key, especially with the relationship circle. There will be minuses. That is the reality of it. And you can't remove them completely unless you isolate yourself, which is self-defeating. Now you're in a circle, right? So if it's going to be a spiral, there needs to be that recognition. It's about perspective. It's okay. There is a difficult coworker in my life, and that's where it's at right now. So how do I balance that? How do I how do I integrate that so that the value that's created even in difficult relationships still has benefit and I can feel good about the journey that I'm on right now?
So again, we'll dive into that a little more next time. And then the last circle for today is the value circle. So what does value or contribution mean to you? And when you think about your own unique contributions that you make to the world around you, what comes to mind in that? And what would people in your circle say? So sometimes as we're looking, trying to look objectively at ourselves, we're acclimated to it. We're used to all the things that we do. You can start to take for granted, who you are and the contributions that you make to the world. You can become blind to some things. So it can be helpful to take that outside approach or view sometimes of like, when someone else is looking at me, what do they see? What contributions would they recognize, that maybe you don't even think of as adding value, but it has value to others.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had done a series of interviews with people under 30, and as I was doing the interviews, I was asking them, what do you look for in work? What's a good environment that would attract you to working? And all of them, one of the biggest things that came up over and over again, it's funny because the three circles were represented, but they wanted to feel that they were contributing in a meaningful way. They didn't want to show up and just get paid to show up and feel like there was no impact made by their presence. So I think that that's a very, very important thing for all of us to think about because, again, if you have meaningful relationships and you have that vitality, and then there's nothing to direct it towards, that can really put you back in that feeling of circling around. You're just being held in place. And after a while, you'll just feel less fulfillment because there's nothing that you're moving towards. You're just going around and around in the same pattern. So recognizing that and discovering what value means to you, and this does not have to be professionally. This can be being an amazing parent. There are so many ways that this can express. So we're not talking about just work. We're talking about the value of you as a human and your unique contributions expands beyond your own personal needs and starts impacting whatever big or small circle you have that you're interconnected with.
Yeah, and like Ken was saying, this is very unique to each of us. Some people are going to find value in being a stay-at-home parent and just raising their children, and having that level of influence and impact on the world is enough. It's everything. It's exactly what they need to feel fulfilled. Other people want to have a larger impact, maybe on their community, especially if you're an entrepreneur, which is kind of the focus of this podcast. You probably want to have a larger impact than outside just your own family. So if you have a local small business, your focus is going to be more on your community. If you're more in the digital sphere, now you can open up, your perspective. Maybe you're trying to influence the world, or maybe you're just trying to influence a few people. So it's up to you. You get to decide what this means. And I remember I was reminded of this recently, but there's a show that was on. I don't think it's been on for several years now, but Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. And he ended up doing a TED talk about the fact that you had these people that were doing all of these dirty, disgusting jobs that none of us would even want to be within a mile, of like a sanitation plant, or just nasty stuff, and for a lot of these people, it was greatly fulfilling. It brought a lot of value because they were making a contribution, and it also allowed them to support their family, and that was enough for them. That was good for them. That gave them fulfillment in their life. So this is where the grace and judgment, or not having judgment, the opposite of judgment, really comes in, because as you're looking at these three circles, it's what's right for you that matters. It's what makes you feel good. It's what makes you feel like your life is meaningful in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, like John would often say. And like Ken said, he was talking about this, especially with vitality, but this is going to go through seasons. You're not just going to continually spiral up. Through your 20s, you're going to be super vital, and and you're going to have your friend groups, and everything's going to be fun and clicking, and you're starting to dive into work and find these new ways of raising your voice, and then you start to settle down and have a family. And like Ken mentioned with the infant example, vitality goes out the window for a while, because now you're doing two more than full-time jobs if you're a working parent, and you're not getting enough sleep, and your energy is being tugged in a lot of different directions. So yes, your number might go down a little bit, but hopefully that relationship score is gonna like boost up, but maybe not. Maybe it creates some strain and stress in your relationship with your significant other for a while. That's okay. Life has rhythms. So sometimes we're spiraling up, sometimes we're sliding back a little bit, sometimes we get a little stuck spinning in place. The idea is to become conscious and aware of it in that self-reflective way, not a self-ruminating way, so that you can continue to move forwards as best you can. So, and John would often say, as best you can just for today. So it doesn't have to be for forever. Today, maybe you can go for the run or take the walk, but maybe next year you're going to be fighting with an illness or an injury, and you're not going to be able to do the same things, and that's okay. So it's looking at where you are now, who you are now, and doing the best that you can just for today.
Yes, and I think the one last thing with this is these are intrinsic things that you're recognizing. So for example, if your value is being that amazing parent, your children eventually are going to grow up and leave. At least most parents hope that they will. So, but that doesn't mean that your value can't be expressed. There's always variations on central themes. So if you understand that your unique contribution and value is centered around that, you become a youth leader or a coach or a Cub Scout leader. You continue to have that impact on children after your personal situation has changed. And we talk with entrepreneurs a lot about this. It's the business they're currently doing isn't the only business they're capable of doing. They take themselves with them. So when you're looking at these circles, you're connecting to who you are at your core and how that's expressed. And that's what lets you navigate life as good luck, bad luck, circumstances change, all of that happens, but you get to bring you with you. And that's the important thing to keep in mind with all of this.
So our invitation to you over the next week or so is just to notice how these circles show up in your life. So how does your energy flow throughout the day? Are you most energetic in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening? That's a really good thing to know. Are there points in your day where you have energy dips? Those are good to know, because now you can start to figure out ways to smooth that out throughout the day so your vitality stays a little bit more level. So just notice your energy, and then notice your relationships. So as you're interacting with different people, again, it's not about judgment. It's just noticing how those relationships make you feel, and how you feel when you're just with yourself. So when you have those moments of quiet, some of us have more than others, depending on how many children you have scampering around your house. When you get those quiet moments to yourself, notice what your inner voice is saying. Notice the relationship that you have to yourself without judgment. And then the final one is contribution and value. So how are you contributing? How do you make people smile as you go through your day? How do you bring a little bit of light? How do you add value to work projects, to your home, to the people, to your community, to the world around you? So that's our invitation. And as always, and of course, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep being you. Just notice a little more this week.